What I want to talk about now is moisture. When you classify soils and you first pick it up, we want you to note the moisture. ASTM talks about dry, moist, and wet, but most of the technician engineers I know can distinguish between dry, damp, moist, and wet. So here's the definitions. We'll go ahead and start. One of the samples, when you have dry, you can look at this sample and it just looks dry. First, mostly it loses the color. So, and I can see a lot of powder, and the sensation I have is dry. There's not really much moisture. So this sample right here would be dry. Now the same soil, when it's got moisture, is right here. So you can see it definitely has some color now. It's a kind of a yellowish brown. And when I feel this, I can feel the sensation. It's not dry, and I can feel some moisture to it, but it doesn't feel sticky. So this would be a damp soil. And here you can see the same soil when it lacks the color and it looks dull. So here's a soil, and we got the clays. I can grab onto it, and when the first thing I feel, hey, there is some moisture in it, but it's kind of a little bit, I feel moisture. So in this case I can feel the dampness. It doesn't have the same color like the gravel did, but I can feel some moisture. Definitely doesn't feel sticky. Now when I go to this sample, these are actually Proctor points. So that was dry of optimum here. And then I came to this sample. Not stick. I can feel more moisture. I can definitely feel it a little more, especially in these samples here. I can feel the moisture. So this might be moist, but when I go to the next sample, it's like, oh, I definitely feel the moisture. It colors my hands. It transfers the moisture to my fingers. So, and it's so easy to move it. This is definitely very moist. Just a little bit more moisture and it'd be wet, and I could see visible signs of water. Now the interesting thing for samples that are near optimum, one thing we can do is it should feel damp to moist. So this just feels damp to moist. It's not moist, it's not sticky, but it's not damp. It's not less than one clue for optimum moisture for your standard Proctor, which is D698. I should be able to take this, make a ball. I'm putting some effort into it, like a squeeze in a baseball, getting ready to make a pitch. And when I break it, you know, it breaks into a few particles. So that's a little bit above optimum. If it was way above optimum, I could come over here and I take these particles, make a ball about the size of a baseball, a little bit smaller. I try to break it, and it's not breaking into any particles. That's way too wet. So this one broke up into, I don't know, let's say 2, 3 major pieces and a handful, 5, 6, 7 other. When we grab this one and squeeze it, it breaks up into too many pieces. So somewhere in between this and this is optimum moisture. Ideally it probably should have broke up into, oh, maybe something like that many pieces. That would have been optimum. So I'm having to break some of these myself because it's a little bit too wet. And so if you have soil samples in between, we could call this dry, damp. This would be moist, very moist. If we saw water on it, it'd be wet. And this one here is a kind of a damp to moist. My guess is just maybe 1% above optimum moisture. Otherwise, for example, even on this, when I see this, you can see it's more granular. And when I feel it, it's not quite damp, but it's So I make a ball. It feels too dry. I would have called it maybe dry to damp, because when I make it, you can see it breaks up in even more particles than we had over here. So this is I would say dry to damp. I can feel a little bit of moisture, but it's just very dry. So we'll want to get our soil, if we were compacting, this is a fat clay, but we want to get it somewhere between this soil, just a little bit dry of Optimum, a little bit of wet, or if you could blend the two. Again, we'd like to get the soil classified as dry, damp, moisture, wet. So dry, it'll look dry, you can't feel any moisture. It's pretty easy to do. Damp, it feels slight moisture, has some color, you can see it, but it's not sticky. Moist, it's just starting to feel sticky, and you can feel the moisture, but it's not wet. And definitely when it's wet, you can see the water often. It'll feel wet, so you want to be able to use those four classification. And again, for optimum moisture, you'll be calling it damp to moist, and so you'll be close, and that'll be good to get the optimum moisture for a standard Proctor. If you're doing modified Proctor like the Army does, you'll probably want to call the soil damp, because you'll learn about the Proctor compactions, but the dry to damp for standard moisture and damp for modified Proctor optimum moisture.